Welcome back, and here is part 2, the finishing of your fine wool eyelet glove. Remember, we're working in US stitch terms. Bottom area there is your beginner chain, your top area is your last worked row. Of course, your hand would be placed in the glove in this way. So remember, the loop where you finished is where your wrist is. We're counting up. We've got a thumb opening, another marker, and then the top area towards the top of our fingers. So we're wanting to make sure that we always finish with a row that brings us down to that end, our wrist end. So just pop your crochet hook into the chain, and then you're going to draw your loop through and begin the closure, the no-sew seam. So I like to do a chain here just to secure the positioning of the beginning part of this seam. And then you're going to go into the very first stitch, and because we're finished in an eyelet row, we're picking up the back loop only on this row, and this will enable us to keep the pattern consistent. So depending on which row you've ended on, the back loop only will be the stitch you'll pick up in order to keep the pattern true. So just work your way stitch by stitch, corresponding stitch, slip stitching together, picking up a stitch on the chain side you started with in the back loop of your last worked row, slip stitching that together, and just ensuring that you keep consistent corresponding stitches all the way up to your marker. Now if for some reason you want to place your positioning of your thumb hole differently, you can by changing the number you've counted. So I'm just showing you there the ridge of your eyelets and how, with even on the seam picking up the back loop, it does create the same finishing. So we've got our one last stitch here, and then we're going to pick up a stitch and then pick up the stitch that the marker is in, and of course it's the back loop only. So we'll do that, and we'll just take that marker out and secure that there. Right, now what we're going to continue on with is the thumb opening. We're working on the chain side that we began with, our very first chain beginning of the project, and we'll be single crocheting along this area, one stitch less than the count we did up to placing the marker on the opposite side. So don't do this too tightly, just ensure it's a loose to medium tension. You don't want to create a much smaller opening in the thumb. And once we get up to the top, we're just going to double check that we've done the correct count, and then we'll be working to close up the thumb area. Okay, so this stitch, next stitch here, will pick up on the chain side, and then we're going to pick up in the back loop again. Just pop out that marker. It's a little bit tricky for me to pick up that back loop, so that's just pop that out, and we're going to slip stitch those together. And that is your thumb opening finished, and we'll continue up to the top end of the glove. Now this will be where the fingers extend out of the glove. So again, just picking up one stitch from each side, back loop only on the far side to keep that true. Now I was just checking there how picking up that first back loop, whether it's too stretchy. If you were not going to do any other finishing around your thumb, I would recommend that you do a chain stitch after you've done your first stitch that closes the thumb, just to secure it, because otherwise it can tend to pull apart. Right, and we're on to our last stitch here, and one chain to secure, and that is our seam. And as you can see, it is nice and simple. As I was saying, if you do want to move the glove slightly down your hand, obviously just count more stitches before you come to your thumb opening, or if you need a larger opening for your thumb, feel free to adapt the pattern, but I do recommend that you do the recommended stitch count as per the pattern initially. Pop your hand in and check. Now this pattern is the extra small. See how that lovely ridge is consistent on the eyelet row. So the extra small pattern doesn't fit my hand, so I can't test this here, but of course the pink was a medium. So now we're going to do the top, and we're going to quarter off, half and quarter off the top edge to do our finishing couple of rows. Now the neat thing about this is the way you've done your single crochet and chain turning at the beginning and end of each row, you could just leave this plain if you wish to. It's got a nice little bump pattern that goes across the top and would be quite fine to leave, but I do like to do another row, and then I'll show you how to do the reverse single crochet. So we've already done our chain, so keeping the work inside out, and with that right side we're working looking at us, we're just picking up the amount of stitches. Now you're not going into a stitch as such, but the top of a row, and the cool thing is because you have done the single crochet at the beginning and end of each row, it's a really nice easy pick up and does keep it looking nice. It doesn't get too loopy. So we're just going to make sure we do keep the count of stitches correct up to the quarter point and the half point as we work around here. And one of the things I do suggest is that you again keep your tension fairly loose. We don't want these areas to over tighten, particularly at the bottom wrist areas. It will be firm to pop your hand in, do expect that, because we don't want it to stretch over time. So I'm just quartering again. I've gone halfway and I'm just quartering to make sure that I keep the stitch count correct as I move around the top of the glove. See how it's still got that nice stretch? So if you have found that you've done it a little bit too tight, then just unpick your work, go back to the seam, reposition your markers and rework this to ensure that you've got a nice level of stretch here. Right, and I'm just going to quickly whiz around to the end, and once you get to the very first single crochet you started with, we'll just slip stitch into that to finish the work. Okay, and just double check that. Yep, that's great. I'm really happy with the stretch there at the top. Right, so we are ready now to do our last row, and we're not turning this as such. We're going to do a reverse single crochet on the top, bottom and thumb opening. So pop your hook back in, and we're going to do a chain there, and then I've got this on slow-mo so that you can see. So the stitch to your right or in the reverse, you're going to be working in reverse, not going forward but coming backwards. So creating your single crochet. Now this will take a little bit of practice, particularly if you are a newer crocheter. So back into the chain there that you can see, popping my hook in, drawing the yarn through like you would to form a normal single crochet, and then I pull the hook right back 90 degrees perpendicular to the work in order to keep the yarn nice and even. You're creating like a rope effect, and if you have your starting loop and the tension as you pull through too loopy or too tight, then you'll get really inconsistent finish. So I found this quite difficult to master initially, but once I got the hang of how to move my hook and how to draw the thread slightly in once I began I got a really nice consistent finish. So persist with it because it is a really beautiful, simple finish for the top of the glove. I think you'll really appreciate it once you've mastered it. Sometimes this stitch is also called crab stitch. I have no idea why, but it's quite ropey. So when you get to your last stitch there, you'll again create that reverse single crochet. Oops, I've just dropped that, so we'll do that again. Swinging the hook round, there we go. And we're going to be tucking that in behind. So just trim your yarn and pull the thread through. Don't redo a chain and pull through. Just pull the thread as is, because you're going to drag when you are sewing this in. It's important that you're keeping consistent the way that each of these stitches sort of sits in behind of the next one. And so you'll see here that as I draw it down behind, all right, so I'm just going to pull that through first of all, tuck it in behind, make sure it's sitting nicely, and we'll take a couple of stitches and then I'm going to tie it off, and then I will do some weaving in. Now, a lot of times people will ask, how do I stop getting my ends from popping out? And often it is that you just haven't taken enough time to weave it in. So also, as you think about your work, will stretch across horizontal, and it will stretch vertically. So I like to do sort of a weave-in pattern which steps back on itself a little bit and then works around in almost like a circle, I guess. What it's doing is it's putting the yarn into different positions so that as there is any stretch on it, different parts of the yarn will get tension, but not the very end, which is going to then want to pop out. So you might find this technique is quite good. So do take the time to weave it in back and forth. On the last part here, I will go down and come back several times and then go back on it again. And again, it's just doing the same effect of stopping the yarn from being able to stretch within the work and therefore pop out. Right, trim that off. And we'll do that in the same way with each of these ends, tails that need to be sewn in. Right, and you can see that seam now, everything's looking really nicely. Let's turn it inside out and have a look at how the seam is, and I think you'll be quite pleasantly surprised. It's very hard to see, looks really nice. And for those of you who don't like to do hand stitching, being able to crochet your seams together is really awesome. So we've done the top, for where our fingers are, we've done the bottom, lots of stretch there. And now we are going to do the thumb closure. See the lovely ropey effect? Really nice. So we're going to do the same finish here on the thumb just to keep it all consistent. So you're just going to pick up that first stitch there. Now go under both of the loops, even though this is the eyelet side, and you will be picking up from here on in the back loop. I do suggest that you grab that first stitch under both. It just gives you a little bit more strength there in that first stitch. So just pulling the slip stitch through and one chain and then a single crochet into that same stitch, and then this is where we're going to go back loop. So if you have got a row that the pattern would generally determine the next row would be a back loop stitch, then do replicate this, particularly if you've added or decreased rows on the pattern in order to alter the fit of the glove. And again with this, just keep it fairly loose. You don't want to be closing up like when we did the first single crochet across the other side, we did it fairly loosely just so that your thumb area is not being overly tightened and reduced. Now I don't get too particular about how many stitches here. I do the stitches that I can see, and then generally when I get to the top seam area, I will also grab a stitch there and just ensure that I'm keeping it nice. So that's sitting really nicely and it's showing that ridge by having picked up the back loop. So I'm just going to go through under both of those there to grab that, and on our way back round we're just going into the original single crochets we placed across the thumb opening when we were doing the seam. So you just do a standard single crochet as you would under both of those two loops that sit across the top of the stitch, and work your way back down to the bottom area. So you've started on the wrist end of the thumb opening and we're coming back down now. I'm just going to poke this tail out of the way. So we've got the glove right side facing you, it's been turned right side out. It's important to do this in order to get your reverse single crochet sitting correctly. Remember, when you did the top you had the right side facing you, so it's important you have the right side facing you here as well. Right into that last stitch, so we're just going to come across and capture that very first single crochet that we did and close the round with a slip stitch. One chain, and then you're going to begin your reverse single crochet again, working back up, going backwards in reverse. Now it is a little bit fiddly, so be patient with yourself if you're finding this a little bit tricky. Just take your time, hook into that back stitch, draw through, work on keeping your loop and your threads relatively even. Just try that wee technique of flicking your needle back around slightly as you draw it through, so that you get a nice tension as you pop your hook back through the stitches. And look, don't be afraid if it's looking a little bit loopy and uneven, to undo back to that bottom area and to start again. It's important this looks nice. This is the finishing, the detail of your glove, and you do want this to look really smart. Right, so we're at the top there and we're just going to continue down the rest of the glove now to the bottom, and here we are. We've just got a couple more stitches in there to do, and then we'll be doing the same technique of pulling the yarn through and weaving in behind. So we've just got a couple more stitches there to grab, and like I said, I'm not too particular about if you've added a stitch or as you've come around, particularly with catching an extra stitch maybe at the seam, because it's only the thumb opening. You'd have to add an awful lot of extra stitches for it to look wrong, or for you to get the fit not quite right. So that was our last stitch there, so we're just going to trim our thread and just pull that thread through. Right, just pop the needle on and we'll get ready to weave this in. And again, remembering that we want to pull the work in behind the last or the first stitch there to keep that rope like effect working. Now that was a bit silly. I'm going to have to turn this inside out to make this work. Hold on, let's do that. So maybe turn your work inside out before you pop your needle on. Right, here we go. So you can see if we come round and we pull it in behind, So I'm just going to grab a stitch there and behind that first stitch so I can draw it down and have a wee look. See how it just looks continuous. You can't see where the beginning and ending part of the round is, which is really great. And then you're just going to continue weaving your end in like I did for the top, where you'll create somewhat of a circle effect. Just going to tie that off. I like to secure it so that if for any reason I have issues with my ends, which I shouldn't, if this is done properly, then you won't see them. So that's it. That is the beautiful little fine wool eyelet glove finished, extra small. I hope you've really enjoyed the pattern. Feel free to comment if you've got any questions, and I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. We'll have further patterns coming through the Etsy store and also some free tutorials as well to help. So the pink glove is the medium, which fits my hand, and I've worked on the extra small. So thanks for joining me, and again congratulations on finishing your gloves, and also pop across and join us on Facebook and Instagram, the Caravan Hooker. Thanks again and happy crocheting.